Greetings, I'm your host, Dr. Wolfula, and when I'm not dancing spastically in the middle of the street while holding a chainsaw, I'm here at the Wolfula reviewing movies. Now, as a monstrous horror host film critic guy, the unfortunate reality I face every day is knowing that the perfect horror movie doesn't exist. Okay, I spoke too soon. In my eyes, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre really is the perfect horror film. Look no further. I mean, the title alone is perfection. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. God. Honestly, I feel like kind of an asshole even reviewing a film this influential, but here we are. You guys have been demanding this for years, and I'm here to try to deliver. What am I to do? It's been 45 years since the film was shot in the summer heat of '73, when the events of the film also supposedly took place, if you believe the clever marketing gimmick conceived by the film's distribution company, which happened to be run by the Mafia. Little bit of trivia there. Bryanston Pictures also distributed Deep Throat, so you can thank them for introducing the world to raw horror and raw porn. Yeah, so the Texas Chainsaw Massacre has a bit of shady history and a troubled production. It was a low-rent horror flick with an initial budget of $60,000, but you know the amateur crew went over budget, you can guarantee it. The late Tobe Hooper, director of Texas Chainsaw Massacre and co-writer along with Kim Henkel, had only directed one film prior, Eggshells, a weird hippie movie. The inspiration for Hooper's dark vision of Texas actually came from Wisconsin. Murmurs that Hooper had heard of a killer and defiler of corpses named Ed Gein, aka the Butcher of Plainfield. Gein was notorious in his time. The stories of the man's devotion to his dead mother and his penchant for turning dead bodies into craft projects was legendary, and was a huge influence on the horror genre beyond just Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Without Gein, there likely would also be no Psycho or Silence of the Lambs, though a couple of women would also be alive still, so there's some give and take there. Hooper took the inspiration of Gein and channeled it into a horror tale of gruesome violence and isolation deep within his home state of Texas. Now, like I mentioned earlier, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre's marketing gimmick would have you believe that the tale that it tells was not merely inspired by true events, but that the events depicted in the film actually happened.
What happened was true.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre was a pioneer in many things, but it was especially a pioneer in what is now the horror marketing hallmark of lies through its poster and trailer claiming that the film is a true document of something that happened. Future horror films like The Blair Witch Project took Texas Chainsaw Massacre's clever gimmick and ran with it, lying to audiences throughout the world and making that paper. It could be argued, though, that claiming a horror tale is true, like any old campfire story, enhances the overall terror, because it apparently happened and can totally happen again. Texas Chainsaw Massacre hits its marketing gimmick home during the opening with a little crawl of text narrated by a then unknown John Larroquette, which acted as a grim portent of what would come in the film and a guarantee that the film was based on a true story. Thank God the internet didn't exist so you couldn't look this shit up, but this crawl adds an extra layer of dread to this particular horror film. The movie makes it clear up front that all the motherfuckers you see in it could very well die.
It is all the more tragic in that they were young. But had they lived very, very long lives, they could not have expected, nor would they have wished to see as much of the mad and macabre as they were to see that day.
Arguably, Texas Chainsaw Massacre has the greatest opening sequence of any horror film ever. It's dense with a lot to unpack because once the portentous opening is through, snapshots of a decomposing body are taken, and not long after, the flick gives an eyeful of a corpse perched on a gravestone like a grisly monument. Through the cinematography and art design, these shots establish within moments the atmosphere and central theme of the film. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre tackles head-on the disregard Ed Gein had toward towards the value of humanity, using human bodies to create art for his own amusement. Beyond these few shots, though, the film's actual credits sequence gets across social commentary. The radio report of the body snatching in Texas that plays over the opening transitions into stories of a world seemingly gone mad. Real-life horrors permeating society are described like oil refineries exploding and an outbreak of suicide and violence following a TV blackout during a football game are among the stories told.
Health officials in San Francisco reluctantly admit they may have a cholera epidemic on their hands.
The radio broadcast opening the film carries a political message critical of sensationalist media, but it also presents society itself as being just as fucked up as anything you'd see in a horror film. At the same time, the background visuals, close-up infrared footage of the sun, is appropriately hell-like. If you spend like 5 minutes a review just talking about the opening of a movie, you know the whole movie's good. Or potentially the rest of the movie is boring. Don't worry, it's not the latter. The plot of Texas Chainsaw Massacre is appropriately basic. You don't really necessarily want a complex story in your horror film, just a solid premise that can sustain itself with plenty of macabre thrills along the way that build up to a solid climax, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre hits all the essential beats with its timeless, influential, perfectly constructed yet simple narrative. The film follows a group of young adults driving across Texas in a van, Scooby-Doo style. Yeah, Texas Chainsaw Massacre was the original horror film with a Scooby-Doo cast. Maybe that's part of the charm for me. Guilty as charged. The young cast of hippie-ish characters is composed of Sally Hardesty, played by the late Marilyn Burns, Sally's paraplegic brother Franklin, played by the late Paul Partain, Sally's boyfriend Jerry, played by Alan Danziger, Terry McMinn as Pam, and William Vale as Kirk. The cast of characters is fairly well-rounded and distinct from each other. Kirk is a typical strong, no-nonsense sort of fellow, the Fred.
What the hell, we should have stuck back there for gas.
Pam is superstitious with an interest in the occult.
Oh no. Capricorn's ruled by Saturn.
Jerry's a jokey, nerdy guy.
Hey man, you believe all that stuff your old lady's hawking me?
And Sally is the girl next door, a modest, plain, every girl. A model for the survivor girl trope.
I got to stay here one time when I was 8 years old, right after my grandmother died.
What happened?
What happened to my grandmother?
Yes, she died.
The cast works and is serviceable for a horror film, but none of them stands out that much, and if it was just this group of four, there wouldn't be any real tension between the characters. That's where Franklin comes in. Franklin is the clear misfit of the group, the tag-along brother in a wheelchair who just makes everything harder, not because of his lack of mobility, though that is an inconvenience, but because he is fucking annoying.
Come on, Franklin! It's gonna be a fun trip!
Franklin is constantly whining, complaining, making excuses, mumbling, or going on at length about some topic nobody asked him about. Franklin makes all the other characters hate him and hate being around the poor guy, creating strain between the characters amidst the buildup when there are no cannibalistic kill guys to be found. The other characters take any opportunity to get away from Franklin, much to his chagrin, making him the catalyst for much of what happens in the middle act. Franklin spells everybody's doom. In fact, Paul Partain was so convincingly annoying in his performance as Franklin that the other actors really did hate him and would avoid him off camera. Oof.
If I have any more fun today, I don't think I'm gonna be able to take it.
Now, the gang is on their way to find out if Sally and Franklin's granddad was really dug up by horrible vandals or not, and also swing by the old abandoned Franklin place, all while dangerously low on gas and in the middle of nowhere. Throughout the journey, the film drops some subtle and not-so-subtle hints that things aren't gonna go well during this trip. Pam's astrology book indicates that Saturn is in retrograde, which I guess is bad if you're a hippie. Of course, there's the prototype Crazy Ralph, an old drunk bearing a rambling, vague warning.
Things happen here about they don't tell about. I see things.
The cook and proprietor of the local barbecue gas station, We Slaughter Barbecue, even tells the kids not to go wandering onto the old dilapidated Franklin property on account of the potential danger out there and the lack of gas for miles until later in the day.
You don't want to go fooling around other folks' property. Some folks don't like it and they don't mind showing you.
Of course, all of these ill tidings go ignored by the kids who do the exact opposite of what they're told. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like many classic horror stories before it, is a cautionary tale. Take warnings to heart and absolutely don't trespass onto other properties, cause you don't know what could be lurking within. Look before you leap. Most of the characters fail to heed the warnings all around them and fall prey to the threat at the heart of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Near the front of the film, one of these threats acts as a warning himself of what's to come. The hitchhiker. A local fucking weirdo, or a Dracula as Franklin calls him.
I think we just picked up Dracula.
I don't know, he doesn't seem like a Dracula to me. The hitchhiker, played by veteran voice actor Edwin Neal, is a loony but seemingly harmless fellow. You know, if you ignore the blood all over his face. Though, in their defense, it's normal to look like this in Texas. You can't walk 5 feet in that fucking state without getting blood on your face. Now, this exchange with the hitchhiker isn't just supposed to be some tension-building scene that leads up to some stabbing, though that does happen. Eat shit, Franklin. No, this scene also raises up interesting ethical, social, and economic commentary about the meatpacking industry.
Hey man, did you go in that slaughter room or whatever they call it? The place where they shoot the cattle in the head with that big air gun thing.
Oh, that gun's no good.
You see, as technology progressed, new practices emerged that made slaughtering livestock more efficient and humane. A boon for profits, but taking away the hammer and replacing it with the quicker, cleaner bolt gun meant less jobs to go around.
With a new way for people to put out jobs.
So then you wind up with a bunch of unemployed fellows like the hitchhiker here, who not only miss the money they made, but also kind of miss the thrill of killing livestock.
I was the killer.
This shift in the meatpacking business is the catalyst for Texas Chainsaw Massacre's horror. Unemployed slaughterers directing their taste for violence at society.
With a sledge. See, that was better. They died better that way.
Edwin Neal's performance is spectacular as the hitchhiker. He's not inherently intimidating, but erratic and enthusiastic, almost childlike in his pride. The hitchhiker is like a socially stunted middle schooler obsessed with death and other edgy stuff, except he's an actual adult man acting like this.
It's a good night. It sure is, man.
It's scary, especially when you're stuck in a van with him in the middle of fucking nowhere. The hitchhiker desires sadistic violence of all kinds, even towards himself, as he cuts up his hand with Franklin's borrowed knife, not a care in the world. The hitchhiker is even more revealing of a character, though. He describes the slaughter of livestock in graphic detail to the disgust of everyone but Franklin, who just loves head cheese. That shit is good. I love it.
They use the jowls, muscles, and the eyes, and the ligaments, and everything.
The disgust of all the other characters illustrates just how horrible humanity can be in real life, even to animals. The characters are fine with livestock being slaughtered in horrible ways for their food, but they don't want to face the ugly truth.
Franklin, I like meat. Please change the subject.
The commentary is what really sets Texas Chainsaw Massacre apart from many other horror films. This movie doesn't have killers in it who kill just because, which is what its sequels mostly did. No, Texas Chainsaw Massacre has something to say using these killers. So, the hitchhiker, after being criticized for his impromptu, hastily shot photo that he awkwardly insists to be paid for, finally lets his murderous side out of the bag and cuts up Franklin. That's a pretty good business model for freelance photography, I have to admit. Not only that, but the hitchhiker goes out of his way to mark the van with a cryptic symbol in blood, targeting them. The funny thing is, the van gets washed at the gas station, but the symbol goes untouched, like it was deliberate. Or this car washer is shitty at his job. Maybe shitty at his job, I don't know. Following the hitchhiker's stabbing, the film also seems to subtly indicate that violence is contagious. Franklin appears absolutely fascinated with the hitchhiker's compulsion to cut himself, and stabs at the interior of the van thoughtlessly. Violence begets more violence. Victim becomes another potential victimizer.
It takes something, though. I mean, just to do that to yourself like you did. God.
It's a scary thought. Luckily, Franklin is in a wheelchair. Have you heard of any crippled serial killers? I don't think so.
Franklin, you're crazier than you was.
All right, admittedly, I've been waxing philosophical quite a bit about the opening act. Guilty as charged. What of the Chainsaw Massacre of Texas Chainsaw Massacre? I'm getting to it. Good things come to those who wait. So the kids swing swing by the old Franklin estate with the van's gas tank critically low, and while the house is charming with its dilapidated appearance, nest of daddy longlegs, and zoo animal wallpaper, Kirk and Pam still decide to split up and search for clues. Or a swimming hole. Either one. Now, despite eerie arts and crafts projects dotting the general landscape, the couple still decides to explore the nearby property and check if they can bogart some gas. Here's where the crucial lesson of the movie comes into play. Don't go blindly wandering around strange places, even if they appear beautiful on the outside, cause you might just run into Leatherface residing within, brandishing a sledge. Leatherface, played by the late Gunnar Hansen, is pretty much the face of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. Well, the Leatherface. Leatherface is a chainsaw-wielding maniac, a simpleton who wears other people's faces, an early model for a slasher villain, but Leatherface isn't necessarily an agent of evil that has a desire to kill. Gunnar Hansen played his monster man against type, having modeled his performance on real-life patients of a mental facility. Leatherface only kills out of panic upon seeing strangers, doing what he was raised to do. He's more frightened of the people he kills than they are of him, I bet. Leatherface is treated as a sympathetic villain along the lines of Karloff's Frankenstein, even having a thoughtful moment of apparent regret or confusion about what is happening. The movie doesn't beat you over the head with the tragic figure bullshit, though. The film handles it subtly so as not to disrupt Leatherface as an effective, frightening character, but it is clear that Leatherface is a victim that wasn't born a monster, just born different and misunderstood. Aww. Leatherface wears masks of human flesh not necessarily because of some physical deformity he wishes to hide, but instead as a placeholder for a personality that he lacks. When Leatherface wears his mask, he adopts the identity of whoever that face previously belonged to. Now, the reason why Leatherface uses a chainsaw? Well, just because it's cool. Tobe Hooper got the idea when he was stuck in line at a store and thought some nearby chainsaws would be good for cutting down on his weight. Now, the only way that story would be cooler if Hooper actually did it. Now, the chainsaw is bloody good at carving up Leatherface's prey for easier storage of the, meat. However, Texas Chainsaw Massacre isn't all that violent, bloody, or gory. Tobe Hooper intended the flick to get a PG rating, believe it or not. So the movie keeps a lot of the gruesomeness exclusively in the imaginations of its viewers. In a way, this film manages to have a profound effect on audiences without showing much of anything. The striking imagery present in the film is enough to conjure up macabre sights of brutality far beyond anything a movie could actually deliver. Speaking of which, the imagery of Texas Chainsaw Massacre is unlike anything ever seen before in film. The art designed by the late Robert A. Burns is transcendent. The farmhouse where the horrors take place is decked out to the brim with lovingly crafted, horrific art pieces, for the most part made from real bones and the like. The film truly takes its Gein influence up to the limit without killing anybody. You know, that we know of. The film's art definitely has an everything in the kitchen sink approach, where Robert Burns threw everything he could into the film to make for a detailed, authentic experience that immerses viewers into this macabre world. I still to this day find new details I love about the design, like the bucket beneath the meat hook that's meant to catch blood. It's a tiny detail that I appreciate because it shows genuine thought was put into the production design, because there's no real blood spilling onto the floor. The filmmakers were just pouring their hearts into selling their fantasy world as the genuine thing. From really weird, provocative art pieces like the Stad pocket watches, to the creepy makeup design of a living cadaver, to the unique looks of Leatherface's 3 separate masks, all the way down to one of the opening shots of a dead armadillo by the side of the road, the film is just filled with interesting things to look at. It also really helped that Robert Burns was acquainted with a taxidermist and a veterinarian. That sort of wasn't great in the Texas summer heat, admittedly. The house smelled like shit, but you gotta suffer for great art, kids. The cinematography of the film is magnificent as well. The flick oftentimes has a raw, documentary feel to it to enhance its claims of truth, seeming like whoever is holding the camera is actually another person there with these young adults, recording everything like an episode of Cops. The camera work also gets more ambitious with establishing shots and long, sweeping tracking shots that build up tension or give a detailed look at the setting of each scene. Then, during the final act, there are these really intimate, uncomfortable close-ups that really put you in the shoes of the victim towards the end. What's also striking are the many scenes shot during golden hour, imbuing horrifying daytime scenes with a sickly orange hue, and night shots are minimal thanks to the budget, but the focus of lighting is placed squarely on the actors, putting them in an inky black darkness where anything can lurk. The film is beautiful in its horror, and the cinematographer, Daniel Pearl, actually went on to reprise his role for the remake. The sound design of the film is eerie as well. Texas Chainsaw Massacre lacks a traditional score, instead opting for a melody of industrial noises that feel like a part of its world. Chase scenes aren't scored, instead they're just accompanied by the sounds of screaming and saw buzzing. The only use of licensed music is during scenes that would naturally have music playing, like Fool for a Blonde on the van's radio.
Where you headed, man? South?
That's a great song. The audio adds to the strange documentary feel of the film that immerses you, surrounds you with the world it creates. The acting itself really shines when the horror kicks off, from the kicks of Kirk's feet upon being bludgeoned all the way to Marilyn Burns' vulnerability and screams of terror. The performances really sell the house as being an absolute nightmare to experience, and also to smell. Oh yeah, if you'd like to visit the house of the film that once smelled like shit, it's still standing, but moved to a different location in Kingsland, Texas as a restaurant. It's a beautiful house. You wouldn't even know people were slaughtered inside. Another location every Texas Chainsaw fan should mark off is the We Slaughter Barbecue, the gas station of the film renovated as a spooky bed and breakfast. Just make sure to check for teeth, peppercorns. The Franklin house, on the other hand, no longer stands. It burned down not long after the film was released, but it was kind of abandoned to begin with. Oh well, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Alright, spoiler time. This is an absolute classic of a film that everybody should see, and probably has seen, but just in case, skip to this time code if you haven't had the pleasure to witness this horror spectacle and want it unspoiled. Okay, it's kinda cut and dry after Jerry doesn't come back from the nearby farmstead. The two Hardesties are unwittingly the only remaining survivors. Sally is dead set on trying to get help, but of course, Franklin has to make things harder and tag along on this mission.
Sorry, wait a minute.
Like a siren song, the duo is drawn to the farm and wind up in Leatherface's sights, who makes short work of Franklin. Eat shit, Franklin. Maybe in the next life you'll give Sally the damn flashlight. Here's where the movie heats up. The chase between Sally and Leatherface is really suspenseful. The movie handles the pursuit well, with close calls, changes in scenery, and a lot of action and stunts thrown in to mix things up from just, running in the dark. Eventually, Sally makes it to the, safety of the gas station with the cook inside, and for some reason, Leatherface ends his chase. So yeah, here's where the revelation comes out. The cook isn't just some friendly fella, but another maniac, who is also kinda friendly.
What are you doing?
You don't need to worry.
No!
No, you just cooperate, young lady, and we'll have no trouble.
Yeah, the gas station is really a front. The barbecue being served was the victims of Leatherface the whole time. Now, the movie doesn't blatantly state that the killers are cannibals, it's only pretty clearly implied. It makes the second viewing when you notice Franklin really savoring that sausage a little hard to look at. Okay, here's a lesson for you guys at home. In a game of broom versus knife, broom always wins. The cook was played by the late Jim Cito, who really does a great job of turning heel into a villain. The cook was a totally unassuming normal guy, and Cito continues the act as an unlikely villain who treats abducting a young girl as an awkward situation he's forced to deal with, but at the end of the day, he's just a sadist who attempts to put his prey at ease with a fatherly guise. The cook is ultimately motivated by greed. When he leaves the gas station with the bound Sally, his chief concern is turning out the lights to save a buck on electricity.
Had to lock up and get the lights. Cost electricity is enough to drive a man out of business.
Taking it further, when he returns to his home, the cook is pissed off at the notion that he'll have to replace the door after Leatherface fucked it up.
Look what your brother did to that door!
Really has his priorities straight during all of this.
You damn fool! You ruined the door!
Ultimately, Sally finds herself waking up in another kind of nightmare. An awkward dinner with the three weirdos of the film, namely Leatherface, the hitchhiker, and the cook, who are all a family, and Sally is their guest out of Southern hospitality. Really though, Sally only lives as a means of entertainment during dinner, on account of the family not having a TV, I guess. Now, the family dynamic in this film is a little ambiguous, but the sequel reveals that they're brothers under the Sawyer last name. The weird thing is that a whole generation of Sawyers is just missing. There are no women besides a taxidermied grandma, and the cook is pretty damn old compared to his younger brothers. It's strange. And then there's old Grandpa, played by John Dugan, who is ironically one of the youngest cast members in heavy prosthetics and makeup. Grandpa's impossibly old, like Carol Channing, and it's sort of unclear if he really is dead or alive, like Carol Channing. Grandpa is practically dead at least, barely seeming conscious, but it's pretty clear, based on the reverence that his grandsons hold for him, that he's responsible for all of this.
I've been thinking about letting Grandpa have some fun. You always said he's the best.
He's the best, all right.
It must have been something else in his prime.
Old Grandpa's the best killer there ever was. I never took more than one lick, they say.
Grandpa's a lot like the actual Dracula that Franklin talked about. He apparently subsists on blood to live so long, like Sally's, which is really, really gross to look at. Grandpa manages to be one of the scariest things in the film without actually trying, but he also leads to the Sawyer family downfall. You see, the boys have to put Sally down sooner or later, and they leave that honor to old Grandpa, who's more than 100 years old by now, so you can only imagine how effective he is with a hammer, but his boys still see him as the fierce killer he once was. This leaves an opening for Sally to exploit, and it all goes downhill for the Sawyer boys once she jumps out of a window for the second time within a day. You see, the pride of a Texan family was the Sawyers' greatest weakness in the end, and it leads to one of the greatest scenes in all of horror, the early morning chase. The hitchhiker could have also easily caught the injured Sally himself, but he succumbed to another weakness: the pleasure he takes in the suffering of others, which leads him to becoming roadkill via a passing Black Maria truck. The film doesn't handle this as a triumphant moment, though, because it's still a horrible sight, and Sally isn't the type to take pleasure in the hitchhiker's death like the hitchhiker himself would. Of course, Leatherface, chainsaw and all, can't handle this clusterfuck on his own and gets overwhelmed by it. What with a black guy throwing a wrench at his head? Ooh, that's gotta hurt. And so, Sally manages to get a ride from a passing motorist, or her Uber driver, and flees, screaming in terror and triumph as Leatherface is left in the dust, with chainsaw in hand to, dance in frustration. Okay. The film's ending is abrupt, and you never get to know what happened to Sally after all this, or the Sawyers for that matter. There's no meeting with the police to tie things up, Leatherface isn't taken into custody, it's absolutely ambiguous. For all we know, the guy driving the truck Sally rides in is just as much of a piece of shit as the Sawyers. It's the best kind of horror happy ending where you're still left wondering, and most importantly, afraid. So, that was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Still a classic all these decades later, and I hope I've accomplished the Herculean task of convincing you of why I think it's so great. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is my absolute favorite horror film. From the opening, the production design, the performances of the killers, the sound design, and all the way down to the thrilling ending, it just fucking works on every imaginable level, and there's so much going on beneath the surface that every single rewatch is a new reward. Definitely watch it not once, but as many times as a puny mortal lifetime can allow. I give the Texas Chainsaw Massacre my highest score of a grandpa out of head cheese. The Saw is family. If you like this video, be sure to like it, but if you loved it, make sure to subscribe to me, Dr. Wolfula. Oh, and keep in touch with me on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Dr. Wolfula. Be sure to also help support the channel in any way you can, especially by donating to my Patreon, where you can keep up with me, get exclusive content, and talk to me directly. Finally, I have some new merch available on TeePublic, so if you'd like to wear some Dr. Wolfula or even goulash swag, head on down there. Of course, the channel wouldn't be possible without all the support I've gotten from my fans on Patreon, and I'd like to thank these folks for helping me make this happen. It really is an honor to make content for so many swell people, and I hope to do you guys proud in the future. Wow, there are a lot of people in these credits. I must be popular. Thanks to all of you once again from your old pal, Dr. Wolfula.
You damn fool! You ruined the door!